A typical cataract surgery is pretty routine. The steps are pretty much the same from surgery to surgery. Every now and then, though, cases come in that are different and complex, and I definitely noticed that when I was beginning this case. It had a very difficult capsulorhexis, and it was doable, but we had to sort of pause. I recall very much at the beginning of this case deciding where the incisions are going to go and how we're going to open the capsule. And so I want to show you some of those steps as we go through this, and hopefully it will be useful in your career. So I'm going to go ahead and put the paracentesis in, and then we're going to go ahead and stop this surgery, or at least stop the video of the surgery, and then we need to talk a little bit. So we have a capsular plaque that's pretty obvious right there in the center. Hopefully by now you're aware that this is not going to tear. This is not going to work at all like a normal capsulorhexis. So we're going to have to make a tear outside of that plaque. The thing that stands out immediately at the beginning of the case, though, is this plaque is decentered, and there's not a whole lot of area up there for it to tear. And so we need to begin thinking about our approach. And it's my hope that we could tear along the margin between the plaque and the iris, but I'm concerned that that's not going to be possible. Let me show you some things that stood out to me when I began this case. And the things that stood out to me are these stria, all right? I hope that you can see that they're kind of arcuate. There's some sort of a twisting anatomy that's happened as this plaque is developed. It's not something that was present since the individual's, infancy. But you see these radial lines. I think they're more stress lines or wrinkles that are in the anterior capsule, and they run quite a lot out. What that makes me wonder about is whether the capsule itself is quite fibrotic and is not going to tear even if we can make an easy hole in it. So there's another thing that stood out to me, and I don't know whether you've seen it yet, but it's this shadow that we see right over here. And the problem that really is going on here is that the edge of the lens, or the equator, is way too visible. So, the equator generally should be out here someplace so you cannot see it, but on this case, it's right there. And so that should ring some worrisome bells in your brain as to whether or not the whole lens is somewhat dislocated this way. There's no guarantee that it is. In fact, the other part that's going on in my brain as I watch this is whether or not the zonules out here are just on stretch, but aren't frankly fractured. But at the beginning of the case, you simply don't know that. So what do we know by this stage? We know that the lens is decentered. We know it has a dense capsular plaque. We know that the capsule has tension lines in it, and it may be difficult to tear. And we don't know whether the lens is secure in the eye or not. So what we're going to do in the next section is we're going to stain the capsule. That'll show us very nicely the tension lines in the capsule. Then we will place the keratotomy and then do some steps to see if the lens is tight or loose. We'll try to determine that before we begin to interact with the capsule to produce the tear within it. Now let's summarize where we're going to attempt to place the capsulotomies. We're going to try most of them with this side port blade. The first will be through capsule only right here. The second will be adjacent to it. The third will be with the scissors right here. The fourth and the fifth will be along the capsular plaque, non-plaque junction. The sixth will be here, and the seventh will be here. The one that will finally work will be over here, and we'll make that a special case. So again, I don't know where I'm going to be able to affect the capsulotomy, so I'm going to try it first through the capsule, and that's at sort of position 1. I'm watching carefully to make sure I'm not putting too much tension on the zonules, but those two positions don't puncture. Then I'm hoping one of these ridges in the capsule can be clipped. That's why I got this scissors out, but it didn't work either. My third thought had been whether there was a brittleness or an ease of opening between the capsular plaque, which is dense, in the less dense native capsular tissue, but it doesn't work there. I was thinking maybe if I moved to a more dense section of the plaque, it might work. Doesn't work there. And then finally I have reasonably easy access over here, and I'm going to try it there also. But by this stage I can see that even though I've got a fairly sharp blade, I'm not able to find an area in the capsule that's weak enough to be punctured. So by this stage I've tried many things, none of which have been effective at opening the capsule. So I figured if I use the Utrata and grab the capsule, I might be able to produce enough counter traction so that I could puncture through with the side port blade, which is what worked. Now with the blade in the finally open capsule, I'm able to begin the rhexis. Alright, so the capsulorhexis is begun through the capsulotomy. Now we just need to convert it to a complete capsulorhexis, and that's not going to be able to be done with a grasping forceps. That's going to require scissors. I usually use a disposable retinal scissor made by Alcon. They're not that expensive, and they are sharp, reliable, and you can then make these cuts either 360 degrees, as we will demonstrate here, or you can make them in smaller segments or arcs, depending upon how the capsular plaque may be affecting your particular surgery. Another option would be to use the MST instrumentation. They have a lot of very good anterior segment instruments, though they're much more expensive than the disposable Alcon scissors. If you have retina surgeons that operate in your facility, you may have the older 23 gauge scissors and manipulators, which they used to use before they migrated to the more standard 25 gauge instruments at this stage, and those also can be used without having to purchase anything additional. So with that, let's go ahead and get into the next part of this surgery where we made the rhexis. So this full capsulorhexis runs about 8 minutes, and I've collapsed it down to about 3. Most of the sections are running at twice natural speed with all of the extraneous going in and out and thought processes cut out. And here we've really run the capsulorhexis around a bit, and now I want to see whether it's loose or whether I can grasp the membrane or the capsule, and it didn't work. So we're going to continue to run it around in a clockwise fashion, getting over past the 6 o'clock meridian and a little bit around to the infero-nasal section. Now I'm going to widen the wound and make it somewhat trapezoidal so that I can run that incision, so that I can run the scissors down in this direction. If I didn't widen it along those directions, it would be hard to advance the scissors in because it would be binding inside that incision. Now we're going to run along the top part of this capsule. There is that that deeper, whiter section underneath the scissors now. That's just cortical opacity. Now I'm going to try to grasp it again and see whether I can pull it or make a little bit of a tear across the top. It's just too tight. And this is another paracentesis I don't believe I included in the video when I made it, but that was my second paracentesis superiorly, which allows me to have access up here. I think a good teaching point is to recognize that it's legitimate to make extra paracenteses so that you can actually reach what you need to, rather than fight and struggle to make suboptimal incisions work. First, try to make incisions that are optimal, and if those don't work, then add additional thoughtfully placed incisions to make the process work. Now, I've slowed it back down here, and because the plaque is so invested into the density of the lens, I'm actually cutting free the capsular plaque and the opacified membrane, which is underneath it, that is sort of mushrooming down into the nuclear material here. This is a step I'd never done before on a case until this one, but because the fragment would not come out easily, I went ahead and dissected underneath it with this dual side port blade. Now I'm going to use the Utrata forceps, and I'm still running at normal speed here, and you can see as I pull on it, it's still a little tight. In a second you'll see it pop loose from the, the underlying lens right up there, and now it's all the way loose. The rest of the case is going to be pretty routine, and there's one more thing that I want to draw your attention to, and it relates to the size of the rhexis. To help point that out, I have taken screenshots back when I was using the scissors to cut the capsulorhexis and represented that by this yellow line. See the tension lines that are there too. Now on the right you can see the rhexis after the cataract surgery is pretty much finished and before the lens is placed in there, and the rhexis is fairly large, especially compared to the original cut. And that's even more easily seen when we superimpose the original rhexis size onto it. Also notice that the wrinkles seem to be completely gone, so the zonules weren't missing, they were just on tension, and when those zonules were on tension, you had all of those wrinkle lines that were there. Anyway, that's that. We'll slip the lens in, and then there's one sort of bonus feature that turned out to be pretty cool with this case. And if you look behind the lens, you'll see this snake-looking thing that is just sort of dancing around and is almost attached to the lens. That's just a piece of the persistent hyaloid artery. And I don't think I've ever seen it sort of dance around almost like an octopus or a squid or something, but you can see that little shadow dancing behind it, which is kind of fascinating. Anyway, thanks for watching. Love to have you subscribe. Please put comments below as you see fit, and I'll try to get back with you. Appreciate it.